Thanks for joining us today. I welcome Mr. Victor Vaibhav Tandon sir on behalf of the YIMF family who has joined us for the webinar on the YIMF Academia e-learning platform. Young Ignited Minds Foundation aims to make our country legally empowered to combat all evils which haunt our nation even after 73 years of independence. With an aim to provide justice socially and economically, we extend our support to the citizens and help them in catering to their basic needs. In furtherance of our objective, and under the guidance of Chairman and Founder Mr. Ishan Bansal and CEO and MD Ms. Priyam Jingar, we have started a series of webinars by our esteemed professors, activists, and lawyers. Thank you, sir, for taking the time out of your busy schedule and for joining us and addressing us on such an interesting and important theme. Before moving ahead, I would like to state the guidelines and the code of conduct of that the participants are expected to adhere to. Firstly, the participants will have to keep the mic and video turned off. The webinar shall be divided into two sessions. First session will solely be for the speaker to deliver his lecture, and the second session will be the question and answer session. Participants are not allowed to turn on their video or audio throughout the webinar. Participants can ask questions only in the question and answer session or when the speaker asks them to. Questions are to be asked only in the chat box. No one is allowed to unmute themselves. Participants creating any kind of nuisance will be removed from the webinar. Please maintain seriousness during the webinar and make the most out of this opportunity. I take immense pleasure in introducing our speaker for today, Dr. Victor Vaibhav Tandon. He is an academician turned lawyer, presently working with Sai Krishna and Associates, where he is a part of a team dealing with pharmaceutical patent litigation and SEP litigation. Prior to this, he taught as an assistant professor of law permanent in RGNUL Patiala. He holds a PhD in patent law and is a registered patent agent. He is a visiting faculty for PG Diploma, IPR, at Indian Law Institute, ILI, and Indian Society of International Law, ISIL. He has also contributed towards massive open online courses, YouTube videos, and audio content development for law for senior secondary students at National Institute of Open Schooling, Autonomous Institution under MHRD. Now I would like to request Sir to take over this session and proceed further. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dhanya. So I'll just quickly move on to my presentation itself. And just let me know if you can see the screen that I would be sharing. It's in PDF format, so I'll just scroll it.
Sure, sir.
Okay. I hope you have the first slides in front of you.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Okay. Okay, great. So welcome, participants. I will just quickly start with the topic, Introduction to Biotechnology Patents. Because this is in the full screen mode, so just in case if my voice breaks or if I'm not audible or if there's any internet connection problem, you will have to let me know and do that. So moving on, considering that we have a very mixed profile of participants in the sense that there are students from across the years. There are, I am told, there are some advocates also. I will be introducing the topic in as simple a manner as possible, keeping in mind that not everybody, not each one of you would be at the same level of understanding or of knowledge about patents. However, because of the complexity of this topic, I will have to assume that at least some basic principles of patent law or IPR are known to all of you. So keeping that in mind, when we talk about introduction to biotechnology patents, two things come in mind. One is, of course, the fact that we are talking about patents, and secondly, we're talking about biotechnology. So one distinction that we have to keep in mind always is that these are two very different branches, and what we are interested in are the intersections, the places where these two very different things, patent law and biotechnology, where they intersect. So when you look at biotechnology, apart from the science, there can, as you can see on your screens right now, there can be a lot of issues like regulatory issues, which would, we had a bill, biotechnology regulatory bill. Uh, and we also have a department of biotechnology under our Ministry of Science and Technology. So they lay down certain guidelines, they lay down certain procedures as to how to go about doing research in this area. The second aspect is that you also talk about biotechnology and environment. As for example, when you are dealing with living modified organisms, the provisions of Environment Protection Act would come into play. And in the international arena, we have Cartagena Protocol on biosafety, which is a part of the Convention on Biological Diversity. There are also questions of bioethics. There are questions of biotechnology and biodiversity, like biopiracy, bioprospecting. So all these issues, including one of the issues is patents, patentability of biotechnology innovations. All of these issues can be dealt within biotechnology law. However, for today, I'm only going to focus on one aspect, which is the patentability and eligibility. Rather, I will be focusing solely on the eligibility of biotechnology innovations vis-a-vis patent law. Likewise, when you talk about patent law, now it is a technology neutral law in the sense that patent law, I'm sure some of you at least would be aware of this, is not just for protecting or giving patents over biotechnology innovations. It's for a whole plethora of technologies. You have pharmaceuticals, chemicals, automobiles, space technology. And there are a lot of issues within patent law, even without talking about biotechnology patents. There are other issues with regard to patent law relating to access and relating to abuse of patent laws or patent rights. For example, standard essential patents are there, so they have nothing to do with biotechnology. You have FRAND licensing terms, so again, nothing to do with biotechnology. The point is that today our focus is going to be on a confluence or on an intersection of these two very distinct areas, focusing purely on some aspects of biotechnology patents, specifically the eligibility of such inventions. And because when we start with any venture, I'm assuming most of you are perhaps not from a science background. So we have to start with what exactly is it that we are dealing with? What exactly is biotechnology? And I saw the study material that you guys were given. So it has dealt in part with some of these aspects. Now, technically, if you look at the scientific text, biotechnology can have a lot of definitions. There are different ways, different perspectives of looking at the same thing. But largely, your CBD, Article 2, the definition which you can see on your screens right now, this is the legal treaty which defines biotechnology as any technological application that uses biological systems, living organisms, or derivatives thereof. And the essential thing is, why are we interested in any technology? Why are we interested in any kind of science or scientific endeavor? Because we want to make human life better. So the most simplistic definition of biotechnology would be that you want to solve problems, you want to make products, you want to make processes for human consumption, for betterment of human life. And these processes, these technologies, they use biological resources or they use living organisms. So keeping this definition in mind, this is a very broad definition. We'll use living organisms. You will say that if I am using cows and buffaloes for their milk production, and the farmer is there who is doing crossbreeding of plant varieties. All of these are also biotechnologies. No, I mean, that is not how vast we would make it. We will try to focus on certain peculiar aspects. Wherever there is use of technology, wherever there is use of human intervention in conjugation with biological resources, and together these two lead to products or processes for the betterment of human society, that is what we assume or we call as biotechnology. Now, certain myths, just a very brief thing about biotechnology in the first few slides. There are certain myths. A lot of people think that biotechnology is a single technology, or biotechnology is one field of endeavor. No. There are a number of technologies which together constitute the umbrella term biotechnologies. And therefore, there are a lot of experts in the field, both scientific experts and legal experts, who prefer to use the term biotechnologies. And I will not be reading from the slides. I'm assuming you can read the slides as I speak. I'll just explain a few things. Uh, Now, biotechnology as a science is very interdisciplinary in nature. So it derives from a lot of things: chemistry, genetics. Genes are a very, very important part, genetics, which I hope we get to deal with them today. Molecular biology, pathology, biochemistry, all these different streams, they add on or contribute something to biotechnology. So it's not a single discipline either, it's a multidisciplinary thing. And there are different industries which use biotechnologies, so as to say. And briefly, these industries are, I'll just come to this slide later. So these are the sectors where biotechnology, or industries where biotechnology is used. So you have something called industrial biotechnology, where your food and beverages come, or you make acids, like, for example, acetic acid. And these industries, they rely heavily on the use of microorganisms. These are living organisms which are not visible to the naked eye. That's the simplistic dictionary definition of microorganisms. Then there is something called environmental biotechnology, where you have different things like bioleaching, which is, you extract metals from low-grade ores. So for those of you who remember your 9th or 10th standard science, you would have studied there that ore, from your ore, you get particular metals. Like for example, aluminium is obtained from bauxite ore. So sometimes when the quantity or quality of metal in a particular ore, a metal in nature is mixed with a lot of impurities, it is very low. So we want to obtain that metal nevertheless. So we use microorganisms who are able to eat away the impurities. And then even low grade ores, low quality ores, can give us very high quality, or very whatever quantity of metals is there, they give us that. Then there are two very controversial fields where biotechnology is used. One is agricultural biotechnology, where you have the use of genetically modified plants. For example, in recent times, there was a dispute related to BT cotton. And you have genetically modified animals. And the problem is that you are going to consume some of these things as genetically modified food. So you do not know how, because these things have not been done by nature. Human beings have done it, so you do not know how they are going to affect your body, or what are going to be the long-term implications or repercussions of consuming such genetically modified food. But this is something for bioethicists to decide. I would be dealing with some of the patenting conundrums with regard to these particular aspects. I'll just explain what some of these points in a short while. And this is, the whole, what should I say, Pandora's box, the pharmaceutical biotechnology, where you have, technologies like stem cells, xenotransplants, and you have vaccines, and something as simple as vaccines and antibiotics. So you have a pandemic right now, and you would have heard that people are going to, in a race to manufacture vaccines. How do you manufacture these vaccines? So vaccines basically try to invoke a immune response in your body. So they will give you an attenuated or dead, or a version of the virus or the bacteria which is causing the disease, or they will give you the same live virus or bacteria, and this will invoke a immune response from your body. Your cells will realize that this is some external organism, it has to be killed. And then they will run to kill it. After killing it, they will remember it in their memory, that this is, if we encounter this kind of troublemaker or this kind of virus or bacteria again, we have to attack it using these particular strategies or these kind of cells. So this is very brief explanation of how vaccines work. Likewise, you have antibiotics, which are antimicrobial. They kill microorganisms. So both these, now, if you have understood this explanation, you would realize that they rely on the use of microorganisms, sometimes some of which are genetically modified microorganisms. So vaccines, antibiotics, xenotransplants, stem cells. Xenotransplants are also very interesting. I'll just introduce these topics to you. You have all heard about normal transplants. When I talk about xenotransplants, xeno means from a different species. You will be very surprised to know, for those of you who are not from the sciences or who are pure law students in the 5-year law courses, um, there is a possibility, there has been research, and in fact there are some granted patents in USA also on transplant of organs from animals to human beings. So, and the animal of choice usually is either a pig or a baboon. So human organs are harvested or grown in these animals, and later on these organs are then taken out and transplanted into human beings. This is the science, the most basic science behind xenotransplants across the species transplants. Whether it is ethical, moral, against religious norms, I will come to that later if we get to that today within the stipulated time. Uh, and then you have, of course, isolated and purified genes. The study material which you were given talked about MIRAD patents, Association for Molecular Biology versus MIRAD, the cancer gene patent case of USA. We'll perhaps deal with that. And then there is, of course, human reproductive cloning and something called nature-derived drugs. So these are the sectors where biotechnology is used: pharmaceutical, agricultural, environmental, and industrial. Now, another thing which I hope if you have read your reading material, there was a very short reference to the same. Please understand one thing, that biotechnology is not a new science. Although it has gained lot of traction, lot of popularity or lack of popularity, it has become very controversial in the last few years. But biotechnology has always been with us. As I told you, the definition part, human beings have always used animals, plants, microorganisms since like 5,000, 6,000 years, since the dawn of civilization. And in fact, something like beer or something like yogurt, curd, which you consume, dahi, sharab, daru, all these things that you consume, they are all products of biotechnology. There is a process called fermentation. Your cheese, your beer, all these things, they come from this fermentation process, which is breaking of carbohydrates or sugars into alcohol. Uh, so, or acids. So we have been doing this. Secondly, there has been crossbreeding or domestication of plants and animals. Since time immemorial, farmers or people engaging in animal husbandry, they would like to mate. Suppose there is a particular bull who is very strong, or who has high resistance to diseases, for example. So they will like their cause to mate with this bull, and then they will expect that the progeny would also be equally strong. And suppose the cow is now somebody who is yielding high quality of milk, and the bull is somebody who is very, very strong and is known to live for long years and is highly, highly resistant to diseases. So if these two people mate, so then the progeny can be expected to have some of their traits. High milk yielding cow who is strong, who will live long, and who is resistant to diseases. So these are the traits. And likewise for crops. But the point of difference between classical biotechnology or modern biotechnology is that classical biotechnology was a hit and trial method based on observations. Farmers, people engaged in animal husbandry, or beer makers, wine makers, they will observe certain processes, they will observe certain conditions, and over years and years, they would develop these mechanisms. Whereas in modern biotechnology, you have something called gene editing or recombinant DNA technologies, where you can combine. I will not go into the details of it. This is not a science lecture. But recombinant DNA means, which is basically genetic engineering, that you can combine, break and combine genes from two different species. Then there is gene editing. Specific portions, you can introduce new traits. So using modern science, modern technologies, you can manipulate plants and animals and microorganisms at a biological genetic level in a very, very precise manner in a very short span of time in the laboratory. So this is the difference between classical biotechnology, which is observation based and hit and trial based, and modern biotechnology, which is more precise, more technology reliant. So, but yes, as a broader term, biotechnology has been there for the last 5,000, 10,000 years. So, and there's one request, for all the listeners, I don't know how you manage. I don't usually read from my slides. I think that's a very shabby way of presenting. So I just speak based on whatever there is there on the slide. So if you have to read the slides, you will have to perhaps train yourself a bit and read it simultaneously while listening to me. So with this background, I think some of the things would be clear to you as to what biotechnology is. It's not something new, and what sectors it is used in, and what are the different kinds of biotechnologies that we are going to deal with today. Now, with this in mind, I'll be skipping some of the portions. It's a 76 or 79 slides long presentation. I'm not intending to bore you with all of that. So as I said, I'm not interested with the ethics. I'm not interested with the regulation. I am only interested with the patenting of biotechnology innovations. So before I start, and I will enumerate the kind of technologies I would be dealing with, and I would be looking at primarily 3 jurisdictions. My main focus, of course, would be on India. We are Indians. And I would be relying on some case laws or some provisions from European Patent Convention and US patent law. So because our law in our country, although we have the sections, provisions in the Patents Act, but from the side of judiciary, because of lack of litigation, we don't have a very vibrant jurisprudence with regard to biotechnology patents. So it is always better to look at what other jurisdictions are doing and to see if we can copy them or if we can learn something from them. So the main source of these biotechnology patents, why are we talking about it? And before 2005, India was not even giving product patents on chemical substances, pharmaceutical substances, on agrochemicals. We were not concerned with biotechnology innovations, but that was till 2005. So what has changed in the last 15 years or so is that we had TRIPS, and TRIPS specifically mandated in its article 27.3b that you have to give patents for certain fields of technology. So article 27 started, you have to give patents in all fields of technology. And article 27.3 specifically said that in biotechnology patents, because of all the problems that are there, you can choose not to give patents on plants and animals and essentially biological processes, but you must give patents on microorganisms, non-biological processes, and microbiological processes. Non-biological processes are those which are not natural, which are laboratory processes which nature does not know of, and microorganisms. Now, one thing I would like to mention over here, it is not that you find microorganisms in nature and you take a patent on that. No, discoveries are not patent eligible. It is only genetically modified microorganisms or any process, non-biological process or microbiological process which has human intervention, which is patent eligible. Number one. Number two, TRIPS said that plants and animals, you may or may not. It's your choice. You may give patents, you may not give patents. But if in plants you do not give patents, you have to give plant variety protection for the plant varieties. So you have to give a sui generis system, which is the UPOV system, which we adopt in India. And we have, therefore, the Protection of Plant Varieties and Farmers' Rights Act, which, of course, I'm not going to deal with again today. So this was about TRIPS. Now, with this background, there are 5, as a thumb rule, there are 5 criteria of grant. And you can see them on your screen: novelty, inventive step, industrial applicability, patent eligibility, and patent specification or disclosure. I will only be focusing on patent eligibility today because we have a stipulated time. And novelty, inventive step, industrial applicability, I am not going to deal with because they are basically the same parameters for all technologies. There's nothing special with regard to biotechnology. I'm assuming that you have some knowledge about these three things. And patent specification or disclosure is the particular application that you file in the patent office. So patent eligibility, which is section 3 and section 4 of Indian Patents Act. Now, this is something very interesting. Before I take you to specific technologies, there are 3 or 4 clauses within subsections within section 3 which are extremely important. Now, one is section 3B, which is right there in front of your screens, which is the morality or public order clause, as we call it in practice. Now, this is basically empowering the patent office to bar or to reject any patent application, which means you will not get patents. You may have novelty, inventive step, industrial applicability, you bring something amazing, but we will not give you patents as a matter of policy because you do not have eligibility. And here I would like to tell you something. You have heard about novelty, inventive step, industrial applicability as the patentability parameters. What I am talking about is eligibility. And there is a particular example that I'm very fond of giving. You can only give exams if you are eligible, if you have minimum attendance. If you do not have minimum attendance, or if you are not meeting the age criteria, if you are not eligible, no matter how sharp you are, no matter how intelligent you are, no matter how well prepared you are, how novel, inventive you are, how hardworking you are, I am not going to assess your ability. Likewise, novelty, inventive step, industrial applicability, I am not concerned about if you are not eligible. Where does eligibility come from? Eligibility comes from section 3. So in biotechnology innovations, I'm going to focus on a few eligibility bars. The first of which is your morality clause. It basically says that an invention whose primary or intended use or commercial exploitation is contrary to public order or morality, or which causes serious prejudice to human, animal, or plant life or health or to the environment, we will not give you a patent. Now, as a very simple example, if I were to give to you, suppose there is a machine, an ultrasound machine, which, when a woman, pregnant lady goes, it conducts a test, the ultrasound machine, and then it is a machine which, if it detects a female fetus, it will eliminate it then and there. Now, this is something, it can be a novel invention, it can have inventive step, it can have industrial applicability, fine. But look at the kind of things which will be happening if we allow commercial exploitation of such an invention. If we give a patent over it, it is something illegal. You are killing a female fetus. It is something unethical, immoral. So over these kind of controversial inventions, we will not give you patents. This is the policy. And with regard to biotechnology now, I'll just enumerate. There are certain points which the Indian Patent Office has noted. We'll just come to that. This clause is very, very controversial and also very important. The funny thing is that you have an exact replica of this law in European Patent Convention, which is EPC. But in USA, there is no such moral bar, so as to say. So USA is a very, very strange kind of jurisdiction, very strange jurisprudence, where they have a philosophy called anything under the sun that is made by man is patent eligible. No morality, nothing. So these are the guidelines of Indian Patent Office that I was talking about. The funny thing is that almost all of these guidelines have been taken from verbatim, copied from the European Patent Convention regulations. So we have copied from Europe, and often, as I will just show, without application of mine. So the first thing is that the Indian Patent Office says that the guideline is that the process for cloning human beings or animals, not allowed. We will not allow you to clone human beings and animals. We will not grant a patent over it. So this is copied from European Patent Convention rule number 28A. Second, process from modifying the germline identity of human beings, which is basically genetic modification of human beings. This is copied from Rule 28.b. And the third is process for modifying the genetic identity of animals. This gets very interesting, which is likely to cause them suffering without any substantial medical or other benefit to man or animal, and so on and so forth. Rule 28d. I'll just come to that. And lastly, use of human embryos, this is stem cells, for commercial exploitation, Rule 28C. So I've given the sources and the specific places in the Indian Patent Office guidelines. Now, two things I would mention over here. Guidelines are not law. The Patent Office guidelines are merely discretionary. They are for the guidance of general public, patent agents, practitioners, and for examiners. Number one, they do not have the force of law, of course. Number two, please understand there is a distinction between regulating a technology and granting patent. So you may or may not grant a patent. That is very different from practicing an invention or making an invention. If the government of India says that we will allow humans to be cloned, human beings can be cloned. On the other hand, if the patent office says that we will not grant patents, so you can clone human beings, but patents won't be given. So regulation or allowing or disallowing a technology and granting patent thereon are two different things. Please don't confuse. So now, with this clarification, let me focus on this animal aspect that the point number 3 that I was talking about. India has a very specific provision in its Patents Act, Section 3J, which says, it's not on your screen, so you can listen to me, which says plants or animals in whole or any part thereof. So when you talk about plants and animals in full or any part thereof, they are not patent eligible. We are not going to give you patents. So then I ask myself, if animal patents are anyway not possible in India, what is the use of judging, as you can see on point number 3, animals suffering vis-a-vis their medical benefits? Because Patent Office in its guidelines, unfortunately, I pointed it 3 years back in my thesis also. It's still the same. I checked it last night. Unfortunately, they've copied it from European patent regulations where this rule is there. We don't have to bother about this because we are anyway not granting animal patents. And where this rule came about from, I'll just discuss a case. Now, with regard to the morality parameter, I hope you are able to make some sense of it. I'm kind of going a bit fast. So in case something is not clear, you can always ask questions. I just want to wind up at least the introduction portion within the time we have. So now, one thing, there is a problem, and this is a very, because all of you are lawyers, you have to think about, what is the law, number one, and why is the law in the way it is? Is there any lacuna? Is there any problem? Can we do something to improve it? You have to be a thinking lawyer, not just a copycat who can just, apply the law and solve things. So when you look at the morality clause, it is a very problematic thing, because morals change with times, morals change with society. So American morality will be different from European morality, will be different from Indian morality, number one. Number two, even within the same time frame, Indian morality will differ from, year to year, age to age, area to area. And for 130 crore people or so, who is going to judge morality? It's easy for us to say that, okay, ban cloning, ban stem cells, but in the patent office, who is doing this? We don't have much jurisprudence from the courts. So who is doing this is basically the patent examiners, who are not always lawyers. They are basically MSc or MTech guys who have to give an examination, and they get appointed at patent office examiners. So it creates a problem. They are not trained in bioethics. They are not trained in law, mostly. And they have to judge the morality of inventions. And then this morality keeps changing. For example, as a very, very common example, 50 years ago or 60 years ago, when we got independence, around that time, women were not allowed to work. It was not considered fashionable. Today, women are treated as equal citizens. They are allowed to work. They go out, they study, they do all kinds of things. So morality has changed, ethics have changed, public outlook has changed. So this is a very, kind of shape-shifting kind of ground. And the other deal is that when examiners in sitting in the patent office are judging it, it creates a kind of problem. So you need perhaps some kind of guidelines, or some, which we have, by the way. You need some kind of guidelines to direct them that, these are the broad areas, and within this you act. Now, this was a thing that I was talking about. You can just read it on your slides right now. And there is another factor, morality of inventions. Is patent law is not really concerned with morality of inventions. If you have a problem with the morality of inventions, you go to the regulatory framework. You stop the research. You stop people from making it. But patent law comes at a second place. You grant a patent after research has been done, after invention has been made. If you have a problem with the invention, with the morality of the invention, you attack it at stage 1 when it is being made, not at stage 2 when you are talking about patents. So these are some questions, which are there in international jurisprudence on patent law, on biotechnology patent law. These are some of the conundrums that writers, authors, academicians, they deal with. Of course, we can't do anything right now because we do have a morality clause in our Patents Act. So Patent Office has to look at the morality aspect. So I hope this much is clear. And another thing that you would be thinking that I'm not talking about biotechnology innovations as such. The deal is that I thought that let me give you a brief about the kind of law or the kind of sections that we are dealing with. And after that, it will become very easy for you perhaps to understand when we talk about the biotechnology innovations. I will take some of those cases, some of those scenarios. Sorry, I'm so sorry. Now, this is something again very interesting. Section 3C. I had given you a brief about this when I was talking about microorganisms and vaccines. Discoveries and products of nature are not allowed. In Europe, again, European Patent Convention, as well as in Indian Patent Act, we have specific provisions. Discoveries, scientific principles, and abstract theories. So if Einstein comes up with E is equal to mc square, not patent eligible. It's a theory. It's a formula. If so there is an Arrhenius equation, not allowed. A whole field of algebra, not allowed. I make a theory, Newton's laws of motion, not allowed. They're all theories. And I discover a planet, I discover a new plant species, new animal species, new microorganism, not allowed. Because these are natural things. What have I done? I have just found their location, nothing. It might be a very hard discovery, still we are not going to give you a patent over it. So now the funny thing is that USA, which does not have any equivalent of our section 3, which does not have any eligibility bar, actually has just one restriction, which is evolved by judiciary, and which is the product of nature doctrine. And the rationale you can see, they call it product of nature. So if something is a product of nature, we are not going to give you patents over it because nature has made it. You have not made it, you have only found it. Discoveries are not patent eligible. And they say that, natural phenomena, you can see on your screens, like the heat of the sun, electricity, qualities of metals, they're all storers of knowledge of all men. There's a policy behind it. These are laws of nature. If I give you patents over basic theorems, basic laws, further research will be hindered, will be impeded, will not be possible. Like in copyright laws, I don't give you copyright over ideas. These are basic plain tools you have. Apply them, make something, then you get a patent. But if I give you patents over basics, what will others do? They will have to take a license from you every single time. But these are free. Nature is free for all. So this is the rationale. And these are some cases. Of course, I'm not going to deal with each one of those. That will eat up all the time that we have. So this is the product of nature US law. The different cases, the way it has evolved, you can just perhaps take screenshots and read these cases at leisure. And now this is where it gets interesting. So there is a myth that Bilski versus Kapos laid down the machine or transformation test. No. The test was in existence earlier. The US Supreme Court merely said this is not the sole test. Machine or transformation test is basically you take a product of nature, you make an application out of it, you apply it, you transform it into a machine or a product or a process. So application based. So if you are making a machine or transforming it into something, a product or process, fine. Otherwise, no patent. Supreme Court said, okay, fine. This is fine enough, but this is not the final authority. And then in Mayo, they laid down the test which is present in the US jurisdiction right now. And this is the two-step test. The simplest thing: do your claims cover patent ineligible matter? Suppose you have discovered a microorganism, you have discovered a natural phenomena. It is patent ineligible, yes. Okay. Is there anything else in your claims which can transform or change the nature to a patent worthy matter? So, for example, let me explain this test by way of an example. I take a microorganism. It is patent ineligible, yes. So rejected. Have I transformed it? No. Again rejected. Now I take a microorganism and I genetically modify it. So number one, is it patent ineligible? Yes, I took a microorganism. Is there anything else which can transform my microorganism into a patent worthy matter? Yes. This time I genetically modified it. This is not present in nature. So this is the kind of test that they use. This I'm going to skip. I won't be discussing section 3D or second use because it will take up a lot of time. And this is section 3J and 3P that I was talking about, plants and animals in whole or any part thereof, other than microorganisms. This is our section 3J and 3P. You can just read it. So basically, you cannot have patents over entire plants, entire animals in India. Any part. Now, this is something controversial. Any part. What is a part? Is a gene, a plant gene or animal gene also a part? Or is it not a part? And microorganisms, yes, you can have patents provided they are genetically modified. You cannot have patents over seeds. You cannot have patents over varieties. You go to Plant Variety Act and you might be able to sense that I am hinting towards your Monsanto versus Nuzivedu case, which was about BT cotton. And some of these issues were raised. Unfortunately, we don't have an authentic determination from the court on these aspects. So whether that genetically modified NAS technology which was used in the seeds, whether that is a part of plant or whether that NAS technology is a totally different thing. And the last thing, section 3P, is traditional knowledge. Anything which is traditional knowledge is not patent eligible. So with this, we have dealt with 3 or 4 of the most important provisions within our Patents Act with regard to patent eligibility parameters. I've kind of rushed through these things, so I understand that some of these things might have happened too fast for some of you. I will tell you some stories, to perhaps that will make your concepts more clear. The first story that I always tell in all my classes wherever I go, and I'll tell you 2 or 3 stories today perhaps. Number 1, suppose I am a US scientist and I am interested in an anti-cancer research. I want to make an anti-cancer drug. I work for a major pharmaceutical company. And so we don't, start with chemicals randomly. We study a lot of things, biological systems, biodiversity. We look at nature, So while my research, I come across a particular tribal group, which I call, Jinkalala tribes from India. Let us say Kerala. No offense to anybody's sensibilities. It's just that I try to teach through stories. So let us see, there is a tribal group in Kerala, and they have, in generations, they have never got cancer. There is no recorded history of anybody getting affected by cancer. And in my research, I find it very amusing. And I go there and I study these people. I will not ask them, "Bhai, tumhe cancer kyun nahi hota? Why don't you get cancer?" They will not understand. So I just observe them. And I find that these people, they eat a particular, you can call it a plant, you can call it an animal part, you can call it a microorganism. So they eat that particular microorganism or whatever, plant, animal part. And this is the only thing which is peculiar in their diet. Otherwise, they're normal people like you and me. Now, as a scientist, my mind thinks they are otherwise normal, they're doing everything fine, but they are eating this animal part or microorganism, whatever. And so there must be something in this which is giving them the anti-cancer benefits. I take that to my lab. In my lab, I see the components, see the genetic composition. There are machines for doing that. And I study and I find a particular biomolecule or a particular gene which is giving that particular microorganism or animal part its anti-cancer properties. So now I make a particular medicine out of it. This can be called, depending upon its atomic weight, I'm not going to the science of it, either a biopharmaceutical or a nature-derived drug. Why I told you this example, when I go to the state of Kerala, I engage in bioprospecting. This is what is bioprospecting. Forget about all the definitions. This is a live example of what is bioprospecting. When I rely on the knowledge of tribals, this is called traditional knowledge. When I take it to my lab and I study these animal parts or microorganism and I do some genetic modification or make a biopharmaceutical or nature-derived drug out of it, this is your application of biotechnology. And this is where your biotechnology and biodiversity interact. Biodiversity is the raw material of biotechnology. And now if I get a patent over it, without giving any monetary compensation to the tribal group or to the government of Kerala or government of India, I am engaging in biopiracy, which is basically unauthorized access of traditional knowledge or bioresources. Because I'm not giving you, I'm not taking your permission and I'm not giving you benefits, it is unauthorized access. This is biopiracy. So biopiracy, biotechnology, biodiversity, and the pharmaceutical industry are interlinked. This is the first example that I wanted to teach you. And I hope this, you can go and read, from books and articles, but this is what basically it is about. I hope some of the concepts are clear now. And the second, hello. Okay. The second story that I wanted to tell you was of an animal. Let us see how you judge this. All of you are human beings. So, suppose I'm a scientist in Harvard and I am studying about cancer. Again, cancer is my favorite disease. I hope I don't die of it someday. So, I'm a Harvard scientist. I'm studying about cancer. And I want to see if my cancer drug works. I cannot test on human beings. You must have, some of you law students must have seen in the pandemics, there are a number of the number of clinical trials. So we start with animals. So now I take hold of a mouse, okay, chua, mouse, and I give it an oncogene. I insert an oncogene into that mouse. Oncogene is a cancer-causing gene. And basically, I make that mouse more prone to having cancer. I have not asked the mouse. The mouse cannot speak. The mouse is a sentient being. I am giving it cancer. Why? Because of my research. And now I will test as and when it gets cancer, whether my medicines work on it and other tests I will conduct. Now, the wonderful thing is I give it to a female mouse and this gene will be carried in the progeny, in the children. So without asking the mouse's permission, try to think if it happens to a human beings. I am inserting an oncogene inside you. Aapko, aapke bachchon ko, you, your children, your entire future generations will carry that oncogene, becoming more susceptible to cancer. And then I get a patent over it, genetically modified animal. Does it trouble you? If you look at from the perspective of animal rights, morality, ethics, does it trouble you? Is this biotechnology innovation, a genetically modified mouse, is it a troublesome innovation? And these, dear listeners, are the facts of the Harvard OncoMouse case. If I have time, I will just tell you what happened in that. And the third story that I'm going to tell you is about stem cells. Although I'm not sure, given our time limits, I'll be able to explain the patenting part of it completely. But I'll just explain the concepts. At least you are introduced to this topic. Those of you who have interest, they can go and study about it. Uh, Stem cells. Now, you all know, I mean, you must have studied some biology at some point of your life. A male and a female, a human being, they mate, and a baby is born. There is a sperm cell and there is an ovary, which egg cell, which fertilize and your fertilized egg is there, and from there the baby is formed. Have you ever wondered that from that one small cell, there's a two cells combined, you get all your brain cells, skin cells, the fully grown baby. Somebody looks like Ritik Roshan, somebody looks like me, not very pleasant looking, I guess. And somebody is very tall and somebody is very short. And how do you get all these organs from that one small cell? The thing is, now again, something is about genes also. You're tall, intelligent, something to do with your genes. But stem cells. Uh, when you, when a baby, when a egg is fertilized, when it comes in contact with the sperm cell, it is fertilized. After 4 or 6 days, a blastocyst is formed. And from this blastocyst, you don't have to mug up this science, just try to understand. From this blastocyst, there are a number of embryo, and there are a number of embryonic stem cells. And these embryonic stem cells, they then go on to form, they undergo something called differentiation, and they go on to form your skin cells, brain cells, eye cells, liver cells, heart cells. So, but at that very stage, the embryonic stem cells, the undifferentiated stem cells, the precursors, they can become anything. When you say, ye bachcha hai, ye kuch bhi ban sakta hai, it's like embryonic stem cells. So, we use these embryonic stem cells for medical research. But as this example must have told you, the first source of obtaining embryonic stem cells was destroying the human embryo. And there is your morality or ethical conundrum or problem. So this is why stem cells were controversial. And of course, now there are other methods also of obtaining stem cells which are not so controversial, which do not involve killing of human babies or human embryos. I don't think I'll be able to discuss all of those methods with you, but they are patent eligible. But any method in which a human baby or a human embryo is destroyed, any process of obtaining embryonic stem cells wherein a human embryo is destroyed, that is not patent eligible. So these were the 3 stories that I wanted to tell you. And now I think I'll just move on quickly to microorganisms, plants and animal patents. I think there's a comment, what could be done to use patents from Indian origin? I'll take this question from the question answer session. I'm so sorry. I'll just continue with this microorganism patents. To give you an idea of the debate, you can all read the judgments. That's not important, but you have to understand the context from which those judgments come. So we start with the simplest forms, microorganisms. And in India today, of course, we give genetically modified microorganisms are patent eligible. We'll give you patents. But this is about a pre-TRIPS time when TRIPS was not there. And I'm focusing on a US case. People think US is the gold standard of patent eligibility and biotechnology patents. It was not always so. So, funny thing is that Louis Pasteur, you must have studied about him, pasteurization of milk. Louis Pasteur was the first to obtain a patent over a microorganism in 1873. After that, in USA. After that, it just stopped for about 100 years. It just stopped. United States Patent and Trademark Office, USPTO, stopped giving patents over microorganisms or over biotechnology innovations. And for the first time in 1972, Ananda Chakravarty, he developed an oil-eating bacteria. Okay, it's a very famous case, Diamond versus Chakravarty. I'm giving you the background of this case. And as luck would have it, it's a rather sad thing that Professor Ananda Chakravarty passed away on 10th June. I came across this news when I was researching for this. 10th July. And so anyway, so he applied for a patent. He said that my microorganism is an oil-eating bacteria. It is not occurring in nature. Product of nature, it is not product of nature. So give me a patent over it. USPTO said no. He went in appeal to Patent Technical Appeal Board, PTAB. Again, no. Then he went to further appeal. Again, nothing. Then he came to the Supreme Court in 1981. And by that time, the public atmosphere in USA had started changing. People were more approving, more accepting of biotechnology. And then Supreme Court said, and these are the conundrums, the basic debates which occurred. These are the basic debates of biotechnology innovations which occurred for the first time in USA. In one form or the other, we are still dealing with these debates only. So in the Chakravarti case, those who were opposed to the patent grant, against the patent, they said that, look, we have, if you give patents over lower life forms, tomorrow, as a slippery slope argument, people will ask for patents over plants, patents over animals, and then this is patenting of life. Life is something which has some kind of sanctity. You are fiddling with nature. And another argument was that patent law is an old law. Can it deal with biotechnology, which is a new technology? And what are the implications of genetically modified organisms, environmental implications? So the Supreme Court, US Supreme Court said that, look, we cannot predict what is going to happen tomorrow. Whether you give animal patents, plant patents, we are not concerned. We are not concerned about environmental implications. This is not environmental proceedings. These are patent law proceedings. USA does not have a Section 3B equivalent, mind you. And then they said, we cannot predict the future. We just have to interpret the law as it is. And our US law says that that you have to grant patents as long as those things are non-natural. Did nature make this bacteria? No. Who made this bacteria? Ananda Chakravarti. So then they said anything under the sun that is made by man is patent eligible. This is the credo of, or tagline of US patent law. This is the case from where it came from. And today, of course, we never had these kind of debates, although you can read the Diminaco AG matter of Calcutta High Court, which was about a process patent. We never had these kind of debates in Europe or in India. We simply had microorganism patents thrust on us because of TRIPS. So this was about microorganism patents. And I'll just perhaps touch last one bit about animal patents, which is the last topic, and then maybe we can answer more queries when the question and answer round starts. So I was telling you that case of Harvard Oncomouse. Now, in USA, on 7th April 1987, I am sure some of you are not born. This is how old the debate around biotechnology patents is. And in fact, somebody very close to me also was not born, and they are jumping up and down right now. Anyway, so they came out with a notice. They said, look at the notice in bold: non-human, non-naturally occurring multicellular living organisms are patentable inventions. End of the matter. As long as you are not a human being, as long as you are not naturally occurring, as long as you are multicellular. Microorganism patents, they have been granting since 1981. So multicellular means plants, animals, stem cells. You are patent eligible. So that is why the Harvard Oncomouse patent, you can see the patent number on your screens right now. Harvard Oncomouse patent was granted in USA. Now, I told you, I'll not go into these details. In Europe, which had that morality, ethical thing, I told you the story about Harvard Oncomouse. So this rule, they said, was laid down in European Patent Organization. They said that when you are dealing with animal patents, genetically modified animals, yes, look at the high moral ground they took. They said, yes, we Europeans care for animals, number one. Number two, if in genetic modification of animals, animals are harmed and pain is caused to them, oh my God, it pains our conscience because we are Europeans. But the so it is against our morality. But number three, what is the reason why you are genetically modifying the animal? You are genetically modifying the animal for the purpose of cancer research, human research. So now there is an element of benefit to humanity. So now the fourth thing is we will balance. We love animals also, we love humanity also. The fourth thing is we will balance animal suffering versus benefit to humanity. And whichever is more, that side wins. So in the case of Harvard Onco mouse, benefit to humanity in the sense of cancer research was more, humanity wins, grant patent over Harvard Onco mouse. This is the line, this is the test that Indian Patent Office guidelines have copied. We need not have copied these because we don't grant animal patents. So that like copied line of IPO guidelines comes from this judgment, Harvard Onco mouse, Europe. And now the funny thing is, although I'm as a patent lawyer, I can't really say anything. We do what we do. We practice the laws. But come to think of it, you are injecting a mouse with an onco gene, and then you are judging human benefits. It's the human beings who are judging this. So like God gave dominion to all, to man over all animals and plants. But yeah, God or सब किताबें and all these laws, regulations, human beings made it. Animals, we are not asking the animals how you feel about it. But anyway, my personal opinions or my morality, my ethics don't matter. So this is about animals. And lastly, I will touch plants. This is just one thing that I would like to mention towards the end of this. So plant patents in India, US and Europe. India, I've already told you, plants over their parts or over whole plants, we don't give patents. USA gives. I'm sorry, this because I transferred it to the iPad. Slide fonts have changed a bit. Anyway, so USA has a three-way protection. I will just give you the names of the act. I will not go into details. They have a Plant Variety Protection Act for protection of sexually reproduced plant varieties, number one. They have a Plant Patents Act for asexually, non-naturally reproduced varieties, number two. And then the question arose, so for sexually propagated, naturally propagated, you have plant variety protection. For non-naturally or asexually propagated, you have plant patent protection. Can we still have patents? And the answer in JEM AG supply case versus Pioneer Hybrid was yes. You can have patents, normal patents also over non-natural plants. And Europe, of course, does not give patents over plant varieties. It gives patents over plants and parts of plants, but not over plant varieties and not over biological processes. There are some cases you can perhaps, some of those of you who are interested, you can read on your own. One thing that I would just mention over here in the end, before I end my talk, please try to understand that although I said that we look at Europe and USA for inspiration, but always bear in mind that their law is very different. Although there are 80% commonalities, but in 10 to 20%, the US law and European law is very different. So when you copy, when you take inspiration, you have to bear in mind that you are living in a different country having a different law. Number one. Number two, in USA, you have three kinds of patents. You have utility patents. This is the term which is used in your study material. Utility patents, number one. Number two, plant patents. And number three, design patents. In other jurisdictions, like in India, we only have utility patents. We give design protection and plant variety protection under different statutes. So utility patents under section 101 of US Patents Act 1952, which is called as 35 US Code 101. Those are utility patents. We have the same criteria. You call it utility, industrial applicability, or usefulness. So patents are given over useful inventions. So we also give those patents. But we just call them patents. We don't use the prefix utility. Number one, there is a confusion over something called as utility models or petty patents. We do not give petty patents. They're not even patents. They're basically utility models which are granted for 6 to 15 years over minor modifications. We don't give these things. Many people think that utility patents and utility models are one thing. They are not. They are different things. Utility models and utility patents are very, very different things. In fact, when you read online material, be very careful. I came across an article on mondac.com by a Bengaluru-based firm. I think there was an honest mistake on their part. They said USA grants utility patents, India does not. That is wrong. India does not grant utility models, but yes, we do grant patents. We have a full-fledged patent law. So whenever you read anything online, just see if it has been updated, whether the information is correct, and read from original sources. So this is about it. Of course, there are a lot of other technologies which we have not touched, but I hope um the introduction to biotechnology has been made today for all of you guys, and you will be at least some of you would be keen to take it up and look at it from a lawyer's perspective, not be scared about the science. So because after all, it is up to the lawyers to interpret the scientific elements. And I'm sorry I went a bit fast to cover up as much as I could. At least some of you have been able to understand some of it. So now over to the organizers. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I think the lecture was really absorbing, intriguing, and enlightening at the same time. With the limited time period you had, and I mean the various topics you covered, I think it indeed provided a really good overview of biotechnology patents. And to add on the various cases that you talked about and the stories made it even more interesting. So thanks a lot, sir. I think with this we can move on to the question and answer session. So I request the participants to remain unmuted. You can raise all your questions in the chat box and all your questions will be answered by sir. So sir, for the first question, I think we have Deepa. She wants to, so she says, India has still not woken up fully to the significance of intellectual property rights, particularly patents and their commercial implications. So
Yeah.
patent filings and grants in India are dominated by foreign applicants. What
Yeah.
could be done to increase the patents from Indian origin?
Well, it's on a spicy IP a few days back, I think in the month of May or June 24th June. Spicy IP brought a piece written by me about university research and patents, where I raised this very point, as Deepa has said rightly, that we do not have many patent filings in India from Indians. And if you look at we have the 2018 statistics brought by the Indian Patent Office in their annual reports, which say that we just have around 50,000, 55,000 patent filings, out of which around 8 to 10,000 are by Indians. These are about patent filings. And in comparison, for the same year, USA and China had around 10 to 15 lakhs patent filings. So, and I also highlighted some of the problems that for low patent filings. We want to become Atmanirbhar Bharat, but for doing that, we have to increase our R&D. Our R&D expense is very low. 0.67% of our GDP we are spending on research and development, 0.67% only. There are small countries, Israel, Finland, which are spending like 4%, China 2.7%. So number one, the spending on research and development is very low. Number two, our university research is suffering a lot because of a variety of reasons. And number three, there is, of course, even there is a lot of good research happening, but at the same time, there is a lack of awareness about patent law. Lawyers are sometimes scared about patent law. They think it is very technical. It is not. If you break a topic into stories, if you are introduced, which is exactly what I wanted to do today. Ultimately, in my firm also, there are lawyers from arts background, commerce background, who are arguing cases of patents, and they are brilliant minds. So you have to, of course, you have to work hard. It is not a technical subject, and awareness has to be there, not just in law colleges, but also in science and technology colleges, engineering colleges. And another thing that disturbs me is that we have 5-year law schools. I'm from a 3-year law school from Delhi University. So I had a basic in chemistry, BSc chemistry, followed by LLB. And my wife, for example, is also a patent agent. She's a PhD in food technology, dairy technology, sorry. And so we need more science people to come, and perhaps like IIT Kharagpur has a 3-year law course, DU has a 3-year law course. We need these 3-year law courses also, so that more science people come and study law. They get a holistic picture of what patent is, what law is, and of course acute lack of awareness. So well, these are the reasons.
Thank you, sir. I think that answers the question. So next we have another question by Prakar Tiwari.
Okay,
So
I think
what is the
sure.
process that a person needs to follow for becoming a patent agent? And does a patent agent lose his right to practice as a lawyer in courts under the Bar Council enrollment in
Oh
case
no
he?
no 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 no! You don't lose any right. I am both a patent agent as well as an advocate, so you definitely do not lose any rights. Uh, Although I do not practice as such as a patent agent, I'm more of a litigating lawyer now, a patent lawyer. But yes, I do have my patent agent license. Now the process is that you have to be a science or engineering graduate, BSc, BTech, MBBS, BDS, what do you call BCA, your science or engineering graduate, and 21 years of age, Indian citizen. And then there is an examination which is conducted by Controller General of Patent Designs and Trademarks, CGPDTM, Government of India. This exam was to be it is held once every 2 years now, 2011, 2013, 16, 18, and it was supposed to be held this year also. Uh, but because of the pandemic, it has been postponed, and it is a three-step exam. There's paper one of MCQ types on patent law. Paper two, which is more technical and difficult, claim drafting, subjective. And the third stage is the interview, which is for 50 marks. So 100, 150, you have to get 60% in each and overall. I think that is the criteria. And then you are enrolled. So it's a qualifying exam. Then you get enrolled as a patent agent. And there are a lot of patent agents who are also enrolled as lawyers. There is absolutely no bar. I was enrolled as a lawyer first, and in 2010 I realized there is an exam like this, so I appeared and I was lucky I cleared it. So there's another question which is related to this, so I will take that up by Ayush Dikshit. A patent agent license, will it help in patent litigation? I'm a chemistry graduate and currently doing law from DU. Yes, definitely. I think as an academician, as a former academician, I will never ever stop you from any academic pursuit. Give the exam. For me, patent agent was a life changer, a game changer in 2010. I was a simple LLB, BSc LLB. After that, clearing the patent agent exam, I decided to come into academics, did my master's from Indian Law Institute in IPR, and did a PhD in biotechnology patent law, and then switched back to practice. For Coming from a science background, being a patent agent will give you an advantage that you will be able to understand some of the concepts easily. There can be arts people and commerce people also doing patent litigation. No harm in that. Nobody to stop them. But if you have to take 5 steps to understand something, they will have to take maybe 7 steps or 10 steps to understand the same thing. So it will be easier for you, and definitely a huge advantage on your CV also. But you have to tell your recruiters very specifically whether you want to be in the prosecution side or in the litigation side. So that should answer your question. There is another thing by um, gene patents. Yeah. So although I have not dealt with that topic, gene patents. Um, with regard to the this Nuzivedu case, I will not say anything. I told the organizers I'm professionally bound not to say anything on that. But generally, I will tell you what the US position is. So from 1991, I will just take 2 minutes to uh, what should I say? Give a synoptic overview of this. So in 1991, in the Amgen case in United States, they said that we will give patents over genes because they are just like chemicals, isolated and purified genes. Okay, not biotechnology moderated or genetically modified genes, sorry, natural genes, isolated and purified genes. They said they are like chemical bonds. We will give patents. But in Myrat case, the U.S. Supreme Court said, what is chemical about a gene? If I am interested in a gene, Myrat Genetics had found BRCA1 and BRCA2 cancer-causing genes. So they said that if somebody else makes a copy of this, is Myrat interested in the gene as a chemical? I can attach another molecule and it will be different from Myrat. But Myrat will still sue me because they are not interested in the gene as a chemical, but in the gene as the carrier of genetic information. It tells the body how to manufacture proteins. That is through the genetic code. So this is the valuable gene information that I am interested in. So you cannot treat isolated and purified genes as chemicals. Isolated and purified genes are basically natural things. If you are simply taking something from nature, isolating it, okay, fine. You are discovering it, isolating it, purifying it, but it is still natural. You have not modified it, so not allowed. This has been a very tectonic change in international jurisprudence with regard to genes. Right now, European Biotechnology Directive and European Patent Convention, or the Europe basically, are the only place where you can find gene patents. They have a very peculiar coded law. But in USA and in India, these kind of gene patents, isolated and purified gene patents, are not allowed. Of course, if you modify it, genetically modified things, again, if it is a part of plant or animal, you will not get.
मैं डिस्टर्ब भी करा था सीन्स कॉलेज हमको लॉ को
मैं क्या
Yeah.
करियो मुझे मालूम है सभी छोड़
मुझे मालूम था ना मैं बोला
I think.
कौन है मेरे कपड़े
Sorry, sir. I
That's
request
okay.
Nihal to remain unmuted, please.
Okay, that's okay. So we don't. What was I saying? Genetically modified organisms, human beings, you can't do that. It's a barred area of research. So yeah, I mean, plants and animals also we are not giving, but plant gene and that seed technology, NAS is the Nuzivedu case. So I will not comment on that. So to the extent isolated and purified genes, no, should not be granted. They are basic research areas, and I hope that answers your query. ये क्या है भाई बायोसिमिलर गार्डन switch in further to make it easier for companies to introduce. I will not say on that because I advise some generic pharmaceutical companies also. I think the law is fine. Biosimilar grant in India, it's fine. We don't need to tweak it, but I really can't give the pros and cons. Maybe you can read some of my articles, but on record, I will not say anything. I'm so sorry for that, Garimaji. And Prakhar, software patents getting granted in today's legal perspective, although it's not related to biotechnology, but in India, Indian law is that softwares per se are not patent eligible. I think it's section 3K. And it's still a developing area as to what is patent eligible when the softwares become patent eligible. So for example, and there's a very good philosophy behind it. So for example, you have a Windows or you have a Mac OS or you have an Android system. These are capable of running across machines. So these are basically softwares which are protected by copyright. Can't be protected by patents. But there are certain kind of softwares, I'm trying to simplify this extremely, which are capable of running in conjugation only with a particular kind of hardware, and which produce a particular technical result in that hardware only. Those are eligible, but what is the technical result and what is the extent of interaction? These are still developing areas. And personally, I would feel there is a whole jurisprudence, although US is very liberal in granting software patents, but there are voices against these kind of patents in US also, and also in India, because many people feel that softwares, there is a whole concept of open source softwares, open source development, and these computer engineers, they feel that if you patent basic technologies, you are writing a code. Copyright, what happens is you write a code and you write it in another language, or you modify it a bit. So idea is the same, expression becomes different, and you can all get copyright over it. So 2 plus 2 is 4, 1 plus 3 is also 4. But the problem with patents is that it will inhibit copyright, software research, because once I write the code for 2 plus 2 is equal to 4 and 1 plus 3 is equal to 4, nobody else can, and get a patent over it. Nobody else can invent around it. So even if I say 1 plus 3 is equal to 4, or 0 plus 4 is equal to 4, I am infringing your final product. So again, I am barred. So, and even the main solution of the process, I am infringing. So even that way I am barred. So patents can be basic patents over basic softwares can be detrimental to the growth of software industry. But yes, to the extent that a particular software produces a particular technical effect in conjugation with a particular hardware, yes. I think there was a case by Delhi High Court, Justice Pratibha Singh. I'm not sure if it is in appeal right now, but some foreign national was there. I'm not getting the name of the case. You can Google and read about it. So, what are the issues around patenting biotechnology? I think that slide was talking about that. So, And yes, biosafety regulations are there. You have to go to the Department of Biotechnology website, Ministry of Science and Technology. You have a number of regulations regarding the research. Can you pursue biotechnology patent litigation? See, what can I say about this? The scope, yes, the scope is there, but if you want to pursue biotechnology patent litigation, it just basically depends on your luck. So most of these matters go to big firms, and if you are lucky, you will be involved in a team which is dealing with biotechnology patent litigation. Like even in our firm, there are different teams which are working on different matters. So maybe if you have enough internships with those kind of teams, or you write those papers, or you are specifically suited for that area, they will pick you up. Otherwise, it's a question of luck and destiny. What kind of cases come to you as a lawyer, as a litigator? Like I started my career as a divorce lawyer. There is no link between patents and divorce matrimonial disputes, but that is the luck. I started as a junior to a central government standing counsel, and then did some matrimonial dispute cases. Now, of course, it's largely patents. So that is a question of luck, which firm you join, which kind of teams you get, and whether that firm ever gets a biotechnology patent case. But the scope is there. Yes, it can increase. Biotechnology can increase. Patenting can increase. Genetically modified food, which might not. The Shonak's question, I don't think I'm equipped to answer, because I'm not an expert of biotechnology regulatory laws. I know the patenting aspect of it, but I'm sorry, I'm not an expert of regulatory mechanisms. Definitely, agriculture not to strengthen to promote patenting of GM food. See, biotech regulatory laws, how can they strengthen patenting? Patenting would come under patent law. And if you are basically going to patent crops, whole crops, then it is not allowed. But we also have to see the kind of technology and where it is placed. Like the whole Nuzivedu dispute, for example, is about the insertion of the NAS gene, nucleic acid sequence, from a bacteriophage, if I remember correctly, into a seed, which of course does not happen in nature. So they had a patent over it, but now the patent has of course expired, but that patent was challenged by Nuzivedu. So, but an authoritative determination has not come. So that portion in our Patent Act, Section 3J, plants in whole or any part thereof. Any part. What is the part of a plant? Is a gene also a part of the plant? Which way the court decides? We don't know. So there is no authoritative determination as yet. So this is it. Regarding Seed Amendment Act, what? I couldn't get the question. What about the Seed Amendment Act? Anyway. So... this is it, I guess.
Yes, so I think, I should thank you for answering all the questions that were raised today.
And I'm really sorry for shooting beyond my time, and I really hope that you were not bored to death.
Yeah.
So,
I think with this, we come to the end of the webinar. We will be sending all the participants a feedback form, and we request the participants to fill in this form, so that we can, organize more such interesting webinars in the future. I would once again like to extend my gratitude to Sir for joining us today and delivering such a thought-provoking lecture. We thank all the participants who joined us today, and we hope to see you all in more such webinars. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, all of you. Thank you.